item 7, page 31.
Chair, Bronda's available to speak to this paper and answer any questions.
Thank you, Bronda. The floor is yours. Where are you? There you are. See you.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and good morning, everyone. So the purpose of the paper is to go through the changes that LGFA would like to make to their foundation policies. This is in response to a number of things. One is around how the covenants are measured and moving that from parent to group. The second one is about CCOs being able to borrow directly from LGFA rather than actually through their parent councils. And the other one is a small change to their structure for finance for ensuring that they're staying compliant for getting their credit ratings. So probably the main one that council might have some questions over is the ability for the CCOs to directly borrow from the LGFA. At present, they do that in a roundabout way. They do that via their parent council, and their parent council is then transfer over the borrowing to the CCOs. This will allow councils to not have to worry about going through that legal requirement to do the borrowing on their behalf. And it also future-proofs the CCOs for going forward, and primarily around Three Waters reviews that are going across the country at the moment, where there may be CCOs that are set up that work across regions and have 4 or 5 councils that are actually responsible for that ownership of that CCO. And if there are any CCOs that come into effect from those Three Water reviews, this means that the CCOs can borrow directly from LGFA rather than actually having to go through an individual council and that council take that responsibility. So, but happy to answer any other questions that anyone might have along the paper.
Thank you, Bronda. I have a question to you and quickly to James. Are you happy with these changes?
Yes, they are primarily structural changes. They don't really change any risk to the councils because the councils ultimately would be requiring guarantees and the likes that are being put in place by the LGFA. And from that purpose, it's a structural change rather than necessarily a change from increasing the LGFA's borrowing capacity across more entities.
Thank you, James. Do you want to comment further before I go to Rick?
I'm happy with the proposals. I guess the other thing I'd note is that the third proposal does increase effectively the capital requirement that we need to make to the LGFA as a borrower for future borrowing, but it's relatively minor in the scheme of our balance sheet and doesn't present any major risks. And actually, I think given that we are dependent on the LGFA, it's in our interest for it to have a good, strong capital base to it. So all in all, I think they're a good set of proposals.
Thank you, Rick.
What's the recommendation by the all-powerful Finance, Audit and Risk Committee?
Where is he? He's not here. Having a cup of tea. Oh, okay. The other chair, Craig.
There's only one chair, but I bow to a higher body, the Corporate and Strategic Committee.
Oh, okay.
Having been part of setting this thing up 100 years ago down in Wellington, yeah, absolutely go for it. We at the end are net beneficiaries of it, given our credit rating versus Auckland, etc. So, yeah, good paper, fully endorse it.
Are there any other questions, or I'll get Craig to anyway?
It's more of a comment and just forward thinking around the Three Waters situation, also our climate resilience. We're going to have to look at ways to be able to borrow for that, and if that means future proofing, I totally encourage this. Thank you.
Okay, hey, just 3.1. Is that an either? We don't have to do that, James.
Look, well, 3.2 is rejecting the amendments, which we're certainly not recommending. So it is 3.1, which is to
appoint councillors.
Yep, to appoint 2 councillors to effectively accept these proposals.
Okay, I would propose that Neil and Craig, being our finance and audit, and our other sort of lost it, Craig, there for a while, but do I have a second for that? Here's Neil's resurfaced. Just giving you a job, Neil.
Good on you. What is it?
We're appointing you and Craig as the two elected representatives of the council to execute this deed. I move that.
Question. If you do that, then every time we have to do change, we have to go back and rechange the names, because you appoint the names. Yeah, I always thought it was good practice in this to appoint people by positions. So, and these would normally have been the chair and the deputy chair, and so whoever fills the position then with this term, next term, whatever term it is, just
very good advice.
So,
very good advice, James.
Look, Chair, I might have this wrong, but I do understand that the appointment is to executing the deed of amendment as opposed to the substantive and original deed itself.
All right.
So
I surrender.
Okay, good surrender, good quick surrender. Okay, do I have a second for those two names? Rick, thank you very much. All those in favour? Thank you very much. I think we just move on for that. We've got two capable people doing that, so that's fine. So we moved that recommendation 3.1, James. That's what we had to do?
Yep. It does carry with it, though, that any mistakes, errors or omissions in this is a personal liability to the secretaries.
Yeah, I read that in the small print too, Rick, and that's why I quickly moved away from the chair and the deputy chair. Okay, thank you very much. So we have item 8, Community Welfare Organisation Relief Fund, page 47. Now, Joanne or James, we'll put it to you, Joanne.
Sure. So the paper there shows that Hastings District Council has already initiated a community welfare fund, which is accessible to community organisations, and people have already started submitting applications to it. So the same idea has been discussed at last week's council meeting, whether we would like to initiate something similar, and we were tasked to pull a bit of a paper together for your further consideration. Obviously, it's the decision of council whether to proceed. There is a contingency fund in the annual plan of $100,000, which could be set aside for this purpose. However, I do want to highlight the fact that there is already been some significant funding made available from central government for community organisations who've been assisting in the welfare response due to COVID-19. There was an earlier set of money of 27 million, and just recently a further 30 million made available. And the second lot of funding, which there was a discussion yesterday with CDM and stakeholders, which means that it's not just for the provision of food, but it is operational costs which have also been incurred due to the delivery of welfare during the COVID response. So it's COVID related. So with that in mind, really, it's for you to consider whether you wish to proceed down the path of HBRC having its own community welfare fund. But if you chose to do so, I would advise that perhaps we hold back for a little while when it may become clearer more precisely where the welfare need may or may not be, given that there is quite a bit of funding already being available for people to access, and the sort of welfare recovery, the social recovery may take a little while to emerge exactly where the issues might be.
Joe, you're close to this with your work with civil defence, especially in this area. Two parts, really. Do you think this is a bad idea, given that the government in, or do you think it's a good idea and we just keep it in reserve and just find out where the need is? And I ask that question because the government is in here deep, but I still get indications from the community that there's still a dire need out there, and that people aren't, these organisations, these charitable organisations, which we'd be targeting here, are still really struggling. But what's your feeling? Am I wrong there?
Well, I think the fact that the additional $30 million has just been made available, and the scope of provision of that money has been extended. It will be. It's too early to tell at the moment whether that will completely meet the need, because it's only just being rolled out this week. I would say I think it's too early to say that you would want to do it right now. There's a lot of activity occurring in the economic recovery space, and you've obviously talked about that. But in the social recovery space, I don't think we're entirely clear yet how that's going to shape up, who are going to be the main players, what will be the direction from Wellington. So if you were to want to do it, I'd say it's too early days to actually put some sort of clearer parameters around it. You might want to hold it in abeyance for a little while longer for if and when. I just think it's too early days.
Rick, I'd like you to comment on, then I'll come back to you, James, as your involvement in this as well. You, James.
Well, I think the other thing is that what needs to be added in here is that there's been a recent change in civil offence, and they have traditionally only reimbursed organisations for the actual spend. For example, a food bank, they get their food from the supermarket, they get all the receipts from the supermarket, and they would reimburse them that. But what they have done now is they've increased it to reimburse people for additional costs which are associated with that, which may be, just turn that on. Additional costs. So, for example, if a food bank had to hire a chiller to help hold the food while doing their activities, this would in the past not have been recoverable, but now will be recoverable. And so they are able to claim for costs which are associated with this COVID-19 response, which they would not have been able to claim for before, but it has to be directly related to COVID-19. So civil defence have extended their net for which is recoverable, which they'll refund, and I'm told that they will work on the basis of trust and be generous. So I think there's a shift here. So I'm slightly in the camp of Joe that a lot of help is on the way. We're not quite sure who's going to do the whole trick, and so maybe we do the right thing here, make sure we're available to do something, but hold our fire until we're very sure of it.
Yeah. James.
Chair, in addition to the uncertainty on the demand side, there's a little bit of uncertainty on the supply side of this equation too, in terms of the council.
Absolutely.
And look, we are proposing to bring to council, I think next week, or it could be the week after, is the revised full year forecasts. And at that point in time, you'll be cited on whether or not we will be running a deficit and the extent of that. And that might be an additional piece of information that council might want alongside a better understanding of demand in the community before making this decision. So if you did defer it for a couple of weeks, I would say you'll be in a stronger position to make a more prudent decision at that point in time.
Neil?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. James, I wonder whether you can tell us, obviously with CDM investing very substantially in the welfare world at present, it's probably its biggest expenditure. How much have we spent, and how much of that actually is recovering? I'm just trying to get to the net position for the council's contribution to welfare.
I haven't got those numbers at my fingertips. I know the work has been done in recent weeks, and I'm not sure whether it's complete. Rhonda may be able to give an update. That work is imminent and will be fed into the forecast.
Yes. So if I can just, and Rhonda might want to add in on top of this, but I was on shift over the weekend, and one of our logs team, Trudy, was pulling together some numbers for Ian McDonald, but I did overhear her saying that obviously some of the invoices from those that we're working with, they don't come in until the end of the month, so we might not have, she had a number, but she said that it wouldn't be the full number at this point in time because we're still waiting on quite a few invoices.
Api?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So completely agree with the comments of staff and councillors around a moment to take a pause and just wait for better detail in the space. I would like to send an indicator to James around our rural communities particularly. In any situation where support is rolled out, regardless of COVID, our rural centres don't necessarily receive an equitable level of support. And I'm seeing some disparity in the current rollout around COVID assistance in our community hubs. So I welcome the recommendation of Joanne for us to take a breath. But while we're taking that breath, I would like to suggest to James that we focus some efforts around our rural networks and our rural communities within the catchment to ensure that there is sufficient coordination in those existing services so that they can quickly fit in with any recovery and welfare packages that might be coming out. And that doesn't need to have a significant cost to HBRC. That's really just about checking lines of communication, et cetera, et cetera. Just while we're taking that breath, I think it would be beneficial to do some pre-work in our rural sector before we get to the real rollout in our recovery programs.
Through you, Mr. Chair, if I can just respond to Piata. We have the network of networks approach under the welfare response, and that one of the sectors in there is rural. So there is a lot of work across the board and many involved agencies. So if we were to go down the track of having a community welfare fund, it will be that network that will prove really valuable in terms of identifying where the need might be.
Craig? Mute, mate.
Sorry, it sounds like we're going to have a bit of a breather, but regardless, that my question was to today's paper or the one you bring back, your number 3 and 4 recommendations, you're setting a criteria, or that's what you're looking at, okay, but please can you also add in the process under which applications go through to keep everybody safe, because it's a small place in Hawke's Bay and we all have, strong connections and interests. So that's, a larger discussion we've been having in general. So if you please throw that in there as, I assume, but up to you, Mr. Chair, what's happening with this paper at the moment.
I think we're getting a feeling to leave the paper on the table until we get a better view of what's happening, given the changing circumstances and the changing policy of government. Is that the feeling of the meeting? Neil, Heniwai? Oh, Heniwai, yeah. Heniwai first, then Neil. Heniwai?
Yeah, I was just putting my thumbs up. Yeah, that's my general feeling. So okay. I'd like us to look at this in a better time when we're in position to make a more informed decision. Yeah.
Neil?
Same thing.
Martin, same thing. Charles, same thing. Okay, right, we're going to leave that this paper on the table until we get a clearer view of what the government is doing in this sector, because we're a drop in the bucket to what they can do, and they may have it covered, where they didn't have it covered when the paper went up. Okay.
A resolution from council to have it lie on the table?
Yeah, we need a resolution. Rick and Neil will second that.
I don't need to speak, Chair.
Neil, do you need to speak? It's all been done. All those in favour? Aye. Thank you very much. Okay. I'm running off the agenda which we were sent, but I presume there was a run sheet, because I think I'm missing a few things, but I can't find the run sheet. So if you're running off a run sheet and I'm running off the agenda, they're slightly different, I apologise for that. And if I'm missing anything, just give me a yell. Okay, so the next one is the item 9, biodiversity Hawke's Bay request for funding change, item 59, and we had a big report on that, of course. Who is talking to that?
Both Mark's on the line and I'm available to speak to it too.
Who was the first one you mentioned, James?
Mark Mitchell, right there.
Oh, Mark, there you are, Mark. I see you now. Mark. Okay, Mark, you can speak to this.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just going to turn my video off. We're having internet issues out here, so I found it works better without streaming the video. So this paper outlines a request from the Biodiversity Hawke's Bay Foundation Board. Biodiversity Hawke's Bay recently made changes to the way they operate. They've employed a part-time general manager and a part-time administrative manager. And as per this paper, they are requesting to change to the current proposed funding mix for the 2021 annual plan. Staff have reviewed this request against the Local Government Act and deem it not significant. And finally, I just want to add to this that the paper was originally destined for the April annual and strategic long-term plan workshop, which didn't go ahead, obviously, due to the current COVID-19 situation. Otherwise, over to you. Thanks.
Question for Mark. Rick, and then you, Martin.
Oh, I don't have a question. I was just going to say it's a pretty straightforward technical paper. I'm happy to move the recommendation, but I'd also just like to make the observation. I like the style as the paper was written. I like the fact that it's clear purpose up front, and I like the little wee box analysis of things, set it all out, so it's all nicely structured. I thought it was really well written. I liked it. Easy to read, easy to understand. Good work.
Thank you, Rick. We'll just hold your moving. Mark may have a question. Do you, Martin?
Yeah, it's a very dumb question, probably. They're usually the best. But I just wanted to understand, thanks, Mark, the difference in practical terms between the endowment fund and the operating expense side. What are the beneficiaries of the endowment fund? What are the implications of this? How does that divide between the two funding streams that we're currently providing work?
Perhaps I could answer that one as a trustee of the foundation. So the endowment fund concept that came out of the development of the Hawke's Bay Biodiversity Strategy was to create a long-term sustainable funding pipeline for biodiversity projects in Hawke's Bay. And so the endowment fund would be added to by donors, philanthropic over time, and would create a critical mass that would provide an ongoing annual revenue stream to Biodiversity Hawke's Bay to issue grants to community groups and undertake biodiversity activity. And so the premise was that the regional council would seed fund the foundation, and that's what the capital here is designed to do, and that seed funding would attract further funding from other parties. The associated operating expenditure is to enable the trust to fund a couple of part-time staff to convene the Hawke's Bay Biodiversity Forum with the community, undertake community events, promote biodiversity in Hawke's Bay, and to ultimately fundraise for the foundation. And I think what's been recognised is that the seed funding itself hasn't been sufficient to generate that level of endowment that had been anticipated, and that there does need to be more operating funding provided to do the fundraising activity and generate the overall presence of Hawke's Bay, Biodiversity Hawke's Bay, to have the sort of profile that would then attract funding. So it's a little chicken and egg, and really what's being sought here is that some of the capital that had been intended to be used for the endowment be used to generate further capital for the endowment. And so the idea is to give it one more year of additional funding at that level, and then it will be for consideration for council in the long-term plan as to whether there's any further funding to be provided for Biodiversity Hawke's Bay.
That was a very, very helpful answer indeed, James. Thank you very much. I understand it a lot better now, and I'm glad I asked.
Well, someone else had another question. It was Neil.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. James, clearly this represents, given that we've got a 4-year investment plan in place, this is $100,000 out of that is 25% of the intended endowment amount. Is it worth resetting the agenda there? What does it go to the long-term plan? Happy to support it, but what are the implications for the whole scheme?
So look, I do think that the overall approach to biodiversity Hawke's Bay needs reconsidering as part of the long-term plan. The view of the trustees at this point is that we should make this change in this final year of the long-term plan, give some extra impetus to the fundraising efforts, see where we get to at the end of this final year, and that would be the time then to review, as opposed to doing it at this point when we're still in the commitment period. So LTP really is the time to do that, in my view too.
Any other questions for James or? Right, no. Okay, then do we have a mover? Rick will move. Seconder? Seconder, Anyway. Rick, do you wish to speak further?
No.
Anyway? Do you wish to speak anyway? Any other people want to speak? No. Okay, all those in favour? Aye. Against? It's carried, thank you. Recommendation is carried. Now, James, we were going to have a presentation on parks, were we not?
In the workshop this afternoon.
In the workshop this afternoon. Okay, good. Just wanted to clarify that. Okay. Then we will go to information items. Item 11, biosecurity.
Right, Chair, I think we do have one more decision item. That's just a fixing of the common seal.
Common seal. I'll move the affixing of the common seal.
Yeah, that's Rick's job. I thought he'd already done it.
I move.
Do we have a seconder? Seconder, Jareth. All those in favour of fixing the common seal? It's moved. Thank you very much. Okay, we go to information item, biosecurity item first up, page 67.
Thanks, Chair. Through you, I'd just like to introduce the paper. And so you've already met Mark Mitchell, who's one of the authors of the paper. We'll talk to it shortly. Just look, really two reasons that we're bringing you this paper now. One is you're shortly going to also consider a paper on the TB outbreak. We wanted to provide you some context on the biosecurity programs, recognising that we've had a couple of goes in bringing you this context through your strategic plan development, but have been foiled in that. So we thought bring you a paper that gives you some background to help you understand our biosecurity programs, so you're better prepared to engage in discussion on the TB paper. The final point I'd make is, look, appreciate you've really pushed for time. There is a lot of material there. Very happy, Chair, to take one-on-one engagements with any councillors who want to get more detail on our biosecurity work after the session virtually. So very happy to tee those conversations up and have some offline discussions with you to give you as much background information as you want. So look, I'll just pass over to Mark, and I see, sorry, Campbell Leckie's joined the meeting as well. Those two gentlemen will take you through some points in the paper, and then I'm sure they'll take questions.
Campbell?
So Mark will, he's currently Catchment Services Manager acting, so Mark's going to lead these papers, but I'm available to take questions at any stage as well.
Okay, Mark, the floor is yours, mate, again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I might just flick this off again. As I understand that the papers are taken as read, but I just wanted to touch on some key points in the paper. So that the core biosecurity functions at Regional Council are pest plants and pest animals. And alongside that, we have a predator-free Hawke's Bay team as well. There is approximately 1.6 million of external costs, which a significant portion of that goes towards delivering the Regional Pest Management Plan objectives. So the Regional Pest Management Plan, provides council the framework required to basically manage those pests through the Biosecurity Act. As you may have seen through the linked document, if you had a chance, the RPMP contains 33 pest plants, 23 pest animals, 2 marine pests, and also 5 horticultural pests. So I've outlined some of the larger operations that we run in the biosecurity space, just to give you a bit of a flavour for what we do as a team. Staff manage biosecurity programs in both the rural and urban areas, targeting specific pests for control or eradication if possible. This involves working closely with farmers, urban residents, and a wide range of organisations, as you're probably aware. For example, I know the pest plant team have visited 314 rural sites and 190 urban sites in the past 3 months. So the team really are out there and covering a lot of territory. Finally, I just wanted to make a note that the staff are also in the process of conducting a Section 17A review, where we're bringing in an external contractor just to review what we do and make sure we're fit for purpose in preparation for the next long-term plan. That's it. Thanks.
Right. Questions for Mark or Campbell? Jareth?
Yeah, I've got 2 questions. I'm a landowner, and that's why I'm asking this question. What is actually the responsibility of landowners in regards to most of these pests, and how well are we ought to know this? I don't know, so maybe that's part of communication. And second question is the chairman's beard. You seem to have identified certain areas. Got it, Rick. Correct. Very good.
Remember, Jareth, these are reciprocal, these things.
Anyway, there's certain areas where I'll rephrase it again, Mr. Chairman. I do apologise for using your position. Old man's beard is being used in certain areas like the area and whatnot. But I see here in the area where I live, actually a lot of old man's beard is actually starting to appear in hedges. What is our obligation as landowners? Because if we can't keep it clean here on our own cultivated land, let alone in dockland.
Yes, so the first part of that, any pest that is in the regional pest management plan is declared a pest. So there's some basic rules. You can't breed, you can't propagate, you can't spread them around. Down to occupier responsibility, it depends where that pest sits within the plan. So for eradication, council generally leads those programs because we want to make sure that we do it and we do it right. But for some of the sustained control pests, say possums or Chilean needlegrass, it's down to the land occupiers to manage those. Now, our staff are working with those occupiers to make sure they are managing those pests. So the fact that you're not sure at this point probably means you don't have some of those pests, which is good news. And in regards to the old man's beard, we do have 2 large areas that we're focusing on. One is north of State Highway 5. The second area is along the Kaweka and Ruahine ranges. The reason we're focusing there is because we know we can have impact and make a difference compared to some of the other areas where it is already widespread. The costs to undertake control in these areas are significant. So we've decided to take a focused approach. In saying that, though, we have put a bid forward as part of that regional economic stimulus package on Old Man's Beard with the hope to greatly increase that area. Yes.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks for your question, Jareth. Before you follow up, you want to follow up there. Jareth is right. It's everywhere on the plains at the moment. Everywhere. So, Jareth, you've got to follow up, and then I'll move to Api and then Craig.
Yeah, because I thought from Old Man's Beard, it actually was an obligation of the landowner to have it to eradicate it, and not to wait on Hawke Regional Council staff to eradicate it on behalf of them. I thought it was almost like an offence to actually have it on your property, because that's how awful this particular weed is. And secondly, I'm getting a lot of calls that rabbits is a real issue. And I'm really focusing on the plains, on rabbits being an issue, and what is the obligation there of the landowner?
Yeah, so for Old Man's Beard, the landowners within those control areas are required to control Old Man's Beard. It's progressive containment, not eradication. We don't feel as though we could go for eradication right now, so it's in a progressive containment program with occupier responsibility. Outside of those areas, occupiers are not required to control Old Man's Beard. And with regards to rabbits, occupiers do have a responsibility to manage rabbits to a certain level. However, council's approach hasn't been so much enforcement as working alongside those landowners to help manage those rabbit issues, because rabbits are a really big pest in Hawke's Bay. And unfortunately, over the last few years, with rabbit immunity building, rabbits have built in numbers, and drought conditions, again, probably exacerbate that. So our programs to primarily help landowners. We provide a contractor who can go out and provide information on how to control rabbits effectively, because there's much more to it than just shooting. And we also will, for some of the large landowners, consider funding up to 50% of the control costs if we deem it necessary.
Thank you, Mark. Api, and then you, Craig.
Straightforward question, hopefully directly to Mark or Campbell. I remember when we were reviewing the pest management plan that there was a pilot program associated with the Old Man's Beard. I think it was the Japanese tiger moth or the imperial tiger moth or something like that, to help address Old Man's Beard. And my request is around when we might be able to see an update on that particular program.
Kia ora, Api. So there aren't currently any biocontrol. So I'll start again. I think it's about 10 different biocontrols I've tried now on Old Man's Beard, and none of them have proven to be very effective. What you're referring to, I believe, was the Japanese honeysuckle biocontrol, and that has been released recently in Tūtera. So time will tell how effective that is, but we're positive because it has had good results elsewhere in New Zealand.
Thank you, Api. Craig.
Thanks very much. Thanks for the report. A few questions and points. Just one that's just occurred to me just now, if you could address, because your point about the rabbits, you said there's a bit of a takeoff or explosion in rabbits in the last 2 years. It's not reflected in the graph, or maybe I'm reading the annual rabbit night count graph incorrectly or something. I wonder if you could address that. Hey, but thanks very much for linking this to the TB outbreak. They go hand in hand. And as you said, we've got another paper on that later, but they are intrinsically linked. And so thank you for that. I wondered if the graph you had on your possum control area RTC monitoring on page 68. So that's across Hawke's Bay, I think, your entire area. And you're nudging under 4, you're about 3% or so. Are you able to, and maybe for another day, provide a more localized version of that? Say, for example, Mahia's got ambitions to be predator free on across Mahia, but I don't know what the starting point is, or other particular areas rather than entire Hawke's Bay. So hopefully that's possible, if you could address that. And then we've had questions in and around, well, who's responsible for Old Man's Beard or rabbits on private land, etc. Yeah, absolutely good points, but my nagging feeling is publicly owned land is not actually, doesn't have its own slate as clean as it probably should, owned by ourselves or the territorial authorities, insofar as all the noxious pests and weeds are concerned. Pampas grass in particular, it's rampant along the side of many roads, owned by the Hastings Council and Napier Council, I guess, particularly. But of course, and we've got goats further up north. So is there something we can do, or is there something that needs to be addressed insofar as publicly owned land is concerned, and their adherence to expectations of pest management, ourselves included in that? And the other 2 points, please. Thanks.
Thanks, Craig. just trying to think. Your first point it was around rabbits. So I guess my point there was that we know that the Khaleesi virus is not working as well as it used to, and we had a number of years with low rabbit numbers thanks to that virus. So you can see in that graph and figure 2 that rabbit numbers have built up slightly since the early days when Khaleesi virus was working quite well, but then it does really fluctuate. And that's most likely driven by environmental factors. And as we know, drought can exacerbate rabbit numbers. So that's potentially why we're receiving more rabbit complaints this year. The second one, in regards to the PCA program and monitoring data, we can absolutely work with you, Craig, and look at some more refined results. We have all that data available, so it wouldn't be a big job. So if there's some specific things you'd like to know, we'd be more than happy to work with you in that space. Finally, the much bigger question, I'd struggle to sort of really answer that. Pest plants across, yes, public land. Department of Conservation are bound by the Regional Pest Management Plan, but only by our good neighbour rule. Otherwise, they are exempt. So we can only apply so much pressure with them. And I know our works group team, alongside the engineering team, do a lot of weed control along our river berms, as there are a significant number of weeds along there too. But weeds, it really is a long-term game, and you just got to keep returning to those sites to do control. I'm not sure if Campbell or Ian wanted to add anything to that broader weed management question from Craig.
No, look, I won't, but I just note, I'm not sure whether Chris Dolly's still on the call. He might be able to comment in terms of how the operations group and the asset management team manage weed pests on council land. I'm not sure whether Chris is listening on the call, perhaps not. But no, look, I can't add to it unless Campbell can.
So just a couple of things. I think in terms of the public land context, we have I guess like an operational agreement with the Department of Conservation. They have an annual exacerbator funding budget, and that's for effectively pest work on Crown land, where the pests on that land might impact on the the non-Crown land or the rateable land adjacent to it. So we work with them to deliver the use of that budget across the region. It's largely used for possums to support small areas of Crown Reserve within the PCA program. So that's certainly, in terms of public land, another mechanism that's available for us to support the objectives on our programs. And I guess the other thing is we actually do spend, if Chris was here, he would talk about this.
He is here.
A reasonable amount of money each year out of the asset management budget doing possum control, in particular on our river berm areas that we're responsible for managing. That's probably just a couple of points.
So sorry, and the territorial authorities, the road reserve, because I know the councils have ambitions and statements about biosecurity themselves, the other councils, but they're responsible for those road reserves in particular, which the public see, the pampas and things like that. So how does that play out?
So Mark, I'll pass that to you in terms of your discussions you've had through the RPMP process, the review process with TLAs.
Yeah, sure. So again, the RPMP only applies to the pests that are within the plan. So, for example, pampas is not. That said, likes of NZTA, they do contribute towards costs of pest plant management along the roadways. It's not a significant contribution given the number of weeds out there, but they are actively managing some of those weeds along those corridors.
Thank you, Mark. Chris, would you like to comment just on a previous question? What are we doing along our land?
Happy to, Chair. Look, I haven't got the numbers at my fingertips, but there is a significant investment year on year on pests within our river channels and other public open spaces, and I'm happy just to probably send out a bit of an email around our expenditure and scope, just so councillors can cite the liquors there.
Okay, there's no more questions. Do we have someone to move to? You got a question or your mover, Martin? You're moving?
You're on mute, Martin.
It's a question.
And Michelle has a question too, so we'll
I
stay
just
on.
want to firstly thank Mark and the authors of the paper. It was really helpful context and filled a gap that I realised I had in the overall framework understanding when we were talking about possum eradication a couple of weeks back. So thank you for that. A question I think probably for Campbell in a way, touched on by what Giraffe raised. Most of our ratepayers live in cities. Now, are these pest issues and biosecurity issues, which are biodiversity issues, are they mainly rural problems, or do they equally apply in cities? For example, on my morning walk yesterday or the day before, I noticed a whole bunch of rabbits in Sturm's Gully, where people aren't allowed to be at the moment, but rabbits seem to be frolicking quite happily. If we activate the urban consciousness around these issues, I know there has been a possum eradication program on Napier Hill, for example. Is that a way to sort of galvanise more landowner interest and responsibility and enable the council to operate within its budget constraints to tackle these issues? Just bringing that whole urban connection with some of these issues to life. Just any comment on that?
So I think probably a couple of comments. The first would be that, yes, that is a way to firstly make our programs a bit more visible to the urban community, and we started that in 2008 with the first program, which was the Napier Hill Possum Control Program, and since then we've rolled it out to multiple urban areas across the region, and just most recently started up in the Wairoa area. So that's actually a way to make it visible, but also people can see the outcomes of some of our programs in terms of biosecurity. While we largely fund programs that relate to the deliver programs on the rural sort of land, there are significant outcome benefits, and you can see those through particularly increased bird life and things like that within the urban areas. So I guess both it's more visible in terms of connecting people to our work, but also it actually helps them to see some of the outcomes, connect to those as well.
Thank you, Campbell. Michelle, you have a question?
Oh, kia ora, Campbell. So my understanding of is, so Osprey takes care of areas that have TB issues, and once that's cleared, it comes over to Hawke's Bay Regional Council to manage. So I'm just trying to work out how that infection, there was the breakout of the infection, the TB infection in the area, where if there's monitoring. So I'm just trying to understand this. So the land occupier must manage the possum control, but how do you check that the land owner is doing that? Because if they're not doing that, then they're endangering the farms nearby. I'm just trying to work out where the there should have been some sort of indication. I'm still not happy with it. It's just like, whose fault was it? Who wasn't doing their job? And it could have been the landowner. But we need to get to the bottom of it, because if it's there, if the issue's there, it's going to continue. And so I suppose when you do the monitoring, or you're doing the pest control or monitoring of farms or whatever, then you'd see that sign. Something's missing in the equation. The other thing is, I heard you mention goats, the issue of goats in our catchment in the northern. One of the areas that we had the cultural assessment on, James, and one of the priority marae whose urupa is in trouble is in Pakowai. You did stand out to do some willow planting, and unfortunately they've got a real bad goat problem out there. And it also occurred when I did some planting at Putahi marae. The goats just destroy anything you try and do. But Pakowai is a real issue, because I'm supposed to give them 1,000 trees. I got some trees from Matariki Tūrako. I'm a bit worried about putting 1,000 trees there when they probably get eaten by goats. And that urupa is in deep trouble. It was a #1 priority other than Ruataniwha. Ruataniwha is planted. It still needs the locking, but just something to note. The goats are, it's terrible. We don't have it here. I think it's because where I am and closer to town, we don't seem to have a goat issue. It might be too many dogs or something. But Frasertown, it's really bad, and I can't plant the trees to help the, you know, and even regional council tried to help and put the willow trees in place, but it just wiped them out. So we really, just from a tangata whenua view on the goats, it's a real issue here. Enough, other than our own people going out and killing them, I haven't heard of anything happening. So just a comment there.
Yeah, Michelle, we really get that. I could see sparkle in Rick's eyes as he's thinking he's going to go and shoot some goats, but goats are a huge pest, especially in your area. We need to deal to it. Ian, I think we might, this is a real loaded question, but Michelle, whose fault was it? Have you got a view?
Yeah, so Chair, perhaps that's sort of drifting across into the next paper on the TB outbreak, where those questions perhaps can be.
Yeah, I think we'll leave that to that paper, Michelle, because it is perplexing to all of us.
Yeah.
Neil?
Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Oh,
I appreciate
sorry.
it.
Well, you had your hand up before. I'll come to you and then back to Neil.
That's right. It's all good.
Neil?
Quick question on Chilean needlegrass. Just your last sentence there quotes additional properties being discovered each season, increasing the workload. What's the feeling on that battle?
Yeah,
so the team work really hard on the Chilean needlegrass. Unfortunately, it's, as outlined in that paper, really hard to identify and essentially can only be controlled during a really short period of the year, being November, December. So you result in this really big peak of work during that period. So most of the properties that get discovered as new properties are closely associated with other properties. They're not generally blips turning up across the region. They're in close proximity, but absolutely there's a real stress point there. The team are pretty mentally exhausted at the end of it, because Chilean needlegrass landowners do view it in different ways. And of being a grass, you can't just spray it because it kills everything else. It kills all the pasture and everything. So it is a very difficult pest to manage. So that's certainly one of the pests we're going to be focusing on in the review, and looking at how we can help maybe get a bit more staff capacity in that space to help tackle it during that really high period season.
Thank you, Mark. That is a serious problem, and you know, we are besieged by pests everywhere. And I think the only way through this, if we're going to win this battle, is going to be science in the end, because otherwise, the economic impact of some of these things is just huge. We've got to figure out a way. Okay, are there any more questions, or do we have a mover to move this paper? Neil? Oh, sorry, Neil, you did.
Yeah, just briefly on a great question from Michelle, ultimately. And my question won't, it relates to the later paper, but probably a question for Ian, and I'm putting my FARS hat on, Finance Audit and Risk hat here, just casting an eye over all of the biosecurity issues. How do we report up that risks are occurring, Ian? And perhaps using the PCA example, what would trigger you to identify a risk as occurring and then bring that to our attention? And obviously with the Mohaka PCA area, there's a significant delay in that. And I'm looking, for example, at the diagram on page 68, the one Craig referred to before. We've got a rising level of percentage of RTC. So what mechanisms have you got in place to trigger an alert back to council, or at least to acknowledge that through our risk management framework?
So yeah, look, that certainly is starting to drift across into the next paper, but happy to answer the question now. Look, in effect, any of the monitoring we do is our primary tool for understanding risk. So the monitoring programs are designed to assess, in this particular case, possum densities using RTC numbers. The thing that's tempting to do in a graph like that is to look at it and start to draw conclusions about what numbers you're seeing in the overall picture. And I'd note that the review we've just received from Osprey on the outbreak, just received that today, and quickly glossing through it, they were satisfied that none of the PCA monitoring variables were indicating any numbers that would signify a TB outbreak risk. What we are going to do in the Section 17A review process, or I'm asking the reviewer to do, is to look at all of our monitoring programs in depth to understand whether they're still fit for purpose, whether they're adequate to manage or support the RPMP objectives, so that we can be satisfied that we're getting information that's robust, it's timely to help manage and then respond adequately to risks, as you suggest, Councillor. One of the things that I'm particularly interested in is understanding from that data things like trends. So we typically, in our water quality and quantity, more particularly our water quality data, we've got very sophisticated statistical methods where we can figure out, are these numbers increasing, decreasing, or staying the same? That's something I want to explore with our pest management monitoring, so that we can quickly and early understand whether we are seeing a real change in numbers increasing over time, or whether it's just an anomaly of the year and therefore nothing to be alarmed about. So all of those questions are before the reviewer at the moment. But I'll just reiterate the comments that are in the subsequent paper. There was nothing that we had in our monitoring or data that was available to us to suggest that there was an impending risk of a TB outbreak in the Mohaka Valley. And my very quick skim of the Osprey review corroborates that view.
Thank you, Ian. I just noticed a question from RP, or more of a comment really, that with all these continuing pests coming at us, our demand on resources is just getting higher and higher and higher, and I think we're all conscious of that. We're certainly besieged by pests. Look, we need to move along. I'd like to get another agenda item done before we break for lunch. Do I have a mover to receive this paper, please? Thank you, Martin. Seconder, Rick. Martin, do you wish to speak?
Just very briefly, Mr. Chairman, and I propose a comment you just made and in relation to science. Science here to me is social ecology. You know, we just simply are going to need to embrace and activate and galvanise the response from every one of our ratepayers in the regional community to tackle these pests. So just, I guess, underscoring the need for that type of approach to this particularly fraught issue. Thank you.
Rick, do you wish to comment further? Anyone else wish to comment? Thank you. Well, all those in favour of receiving this paper? Aye. Against is carried. Well, we'll move to the which we've touched on already, the TB outbreak, item 12, and that's you again, Ian, is it?
So, Chair, just perhaps quickly, I'll hand it over to Mark again, but just quickly going to the question of Michelle around blame. This report doesn't seek to attribute blame to any party. What the report does is look at our particular work in our response, or our work prior to and then our response subsequent to the outbreak. As I've mentioned, there is a review document that Osprey have shared with us just today that goes into reasonable detail on the outbreak that we're going to look at in review, and we will come back to you with any advice that comes out of that review that's relevant to our program. So this paper doesn't seek to point the finger, if you like. It's simply a description of our roles and responsibilities when it comes to TB management, our work prior to and our work subsequent to the outbreak. So look, I'll hand over to Campbell or Mark. I think Mark might be leading it, and again, happy to take questions afterwards.
Mark?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, this paper was intended just to provide you with a background of both our PCA program and how it relates to the Osprey managed program. There is a bit of detail in the paper, I'll acknowledge that, and that's largely because there has been quite a varied relationship with Council and Osprey over the years. You know, the Regional Council delivered Osprey's vector management program right up until 2013. So that meant it was council-led. We were controlling possums in Osprey area. in 2013, Osprey took that back, and we were no longer undertaking that work. So the relationship then really focused on the areas that roll off Osprey vector management and into our PCA program. So just to be really clear on that, what that means is Osprey's function is to eradicate bovine tuberculosis. To be honest, they don't really care that much about possums. It's the fact that possums are a vector for TB. That's why they care. So as soon as TB is eradicated from an area, they walk away from it, and possum levels can increase back to what they once were, which does happen in other parts of the country. The difference in Hawke's Bay is we have a program, as you're aware, the PCA program, the Possum Control Area Program, where once those areas come out of Osprey managed vector control areas, they are then entered into the PCA program. Now, possums are required to be maintained to a 4% RTC or lower, and it's occupier responsibility. So that's when our staff, we go out and meet every single landowner, sit down with them, explain the program when it gets rolled over. We also pay and set up all the bait stations to make it nice and easy for them. And then we refer them either to contractors, because that's what we prefer, or they have the option of undertaking self-control. And then finally, we have a monitoring program of which we go out and monitor around 80 to 100,000 hectares per year. And that's a snapshot of what's going on, and we really target that monitoring. The program has grown significantly as more and more area has rolled off from Osprey. So that's again highlighted in this paper, where we're going to be doing a bit of thinking around that moving into the long-term plan in regards to, do we need to do more monitoring to pick up some of these hotspots earlier. Having said that, I need to be really clear, as Ian pointed out, the outbreak was not the failing of HBRC. And Ian, are you able to share the that map? Unfortunately, that didn't make it into the agenda.
Yep, will do. Just doing that now.
Someone emailed it to us. It's in our email.
Yeah, if you're able to bring that up, or if Ian's able to share it.
Yeah, it's not coming up. Just keep talking, Mark. I'll get it to appear shortly.
Doesn't matter what you say, Mark.
To us all.
Okay, well, hopefully you can access that map. If not, hopefully you can view it afterwards. But essentially, it's a map of the Hawke's Bay region. You've got a light brown colour to the north and to the south. That is the Hawke's Bay Regional Council PCA program. You then have a big chunk in the centre. Part of that is blue hatch. Now, that blue hatched area is also the PCA program. Most of that had rolled off TB Osprey management in recent years. That is now included in that vector management area due to the TB outbreak. So it gives you an idea of the PCAs that are now affected due to this outbreak. The most important bit, though, is that dark brown area. That is Osprey managed area. I know people have referred to it as a Mohaka PCA. It's not a PCA. It never has been a PCA. HBRC have never managed that as part of the PCA program. That has always been managed by Osprey as vector management. You see the purple circle. There is no one TB that's been stuck in wildlife there, and they have struggled to get that out. What's happened is they haven't been able to do that. So they had a buffer program around that. And talking to Osprey, what they believe is there's been a breach in the buffer, and that has spread through the possums down corridors, resulting in what is quite a big outbreak. So that's the fundamental principle there, is yes, it is affecting our PCAs, but no, our PCAs were not to blame for the outbreak. Again, I don't think much more needs to be said around this. We have approached Osprey staff, and we continue to work with Osprey staff at a staff level, and Ian's touched on that as well. So I guess we can open up to questions, unless Campbell or Ian, you would like to add anything further.
Has everyone got this map in the email? Make sure that Tenant Te Whenua reps have got it.
I haven't seen that one. There was the other one we had with Osprey. It showed where all the infection rates were. I don't think.
This one was emailed.
Excuse me, if you haven't got this map, can you please let Ian know, and he'll get it to you. Right, any other questions? Craig, and then you, Michelle.
Thanks very much. And as we said earlier, these papers are just all linked, and you're at pains to point out where the outbreak kind of may originated, Osprey or HBRC or PCA area, whatever. And yeah, look, you're absolutely right. But the challenge I have and the fear I have is basically we have a serious TB issue in Hawke's Bay, and a couple of organisations have different responsibilities. It really just sounds like I think it was around 2013. We handed over things to Osprey, and we assumed that they were doing what we believe they were supposed to be doing. And as we heard last week or 2 weeks ago, the comms between the two, or something happened there to land us in a situation where there just didn't seem to be the communication back and forth or something. And again, I'm pains to point out, I'm not looking for actually who's to blame here. I'm just looking to what's the solution. And your previous paper and this one points to, hey, we're getting ahead together, and it's very nice of them to share with you the review. And I'm incredibly surprised that they weren't forthcoming in some of these reviews and questions about comms from their point of view back to us yourselves, HBRC, along the way as well. The challenge is we can't really sit down with them like we are today. Can I just ask 2 questions? Para 11, production and around production forestry, and the 500 metres that foresters have to have as a buffer along their edge. And to me, this just reads like this has not been enforced properly, because right at the end it says, so foresters have to have a 500 metre buffer along their edge, probably plus more to make sure they comply. And then it says why this usually requires production forestry to manage a great area. To be confident, the exemption does pose a risk to the PCA program where forestry companies are not diligent in delivering annual control. So, are forestry companies across Hawke's Bay, regardless of who their owner is, doing what we should expect of them and what they're legally obliged to do insofar as, possums in particular, but therefore all vectors for TB, to prevent TB occurring in our region? That's question 1. And then question 2, para 23, who sits on the TB-free committee? HBRC sits on the Hawke's Bay TB-free committee. Is that down at the management level or something? And how does that report back up to ourselves? And excuse me, but I haven't seen that one before. So someone just asked that one. But the important question is, what are the forestry companies doing and our enforcement?
Go to that question first, then, but to you, Rick.
So, Chair, look, I'll get Campbell perhaps or Mark to answer that. Look, just one comment I would make is that I think what this particular outbreak has identified is the need to have a look, particularly at our RPMP and how it's structured around forestry. Those are the sorts of things, again, that I've asked the reviewer, our Section 17A reviewer, to look at in detail to answer those questions. So, look, have we got that right? Are there potential gaps there? Should we address them? But I'll get Mark and or Campbell to talk about compliance monitoring in relation to forestry.
Yeah, thank you. So the reason we flag this is exactly that so forestry companies are undertaking control, and we do monitor them. So we have some of the larger companies such as Pampac and whatnot doing a great job. I guess the risk we see is within large forestry areas, there can be a residual, a nucleus of possums that can survive in that, and they are controlling their buffer parameter. So when it comes to harvesting and whatnot, the possums could be moved or disturbed, and that was something that's been raised with us and that we're looking into as, again, part of that review. So we just wanted to really flag that with you. It's something that we acknowledge. It has been, concerns have been raised to us, and we're going to be looking into that to make sure that it isn't actually posing a significant risk to the program. And secondly, so I sit on the Osprey, it's the TB-free management committee, alongside Councillor Will Foley as well. And I provide updates through our significant activities report. And I guess Councillor Will Foley can also add in as required.
Do you wish to add to that, Will, and I'll go to Rick?
Oh, no, only that only been to one of those meetings so far. I've got to admit, it wasn't a pleasant meeting to step into on my first go. There was some pretty disgruntled farmers there. Steve, the CEO of Osprey, we had here last week or a couple of weeks ago, he was there as well to answer, and everyone was just basically the same as what we are here, is how did this happen, and yeah, what are we going to do about it? But yeah, needless to say, there was some pretty upset and angry farmers at the situation that had unfolded.
Ian, I see your hand up. Do you want to...
Chair, perhaps just to add really briefly to that, look, I think all of this has identified that our relationships at a senior leadership and strategic level with Osprey are the things that probably need to be bolstered, and it's something the sector has identified nationally. It's inconsistent with Osprey across all of New Zealand, so we are actively looking to re-establish and firm up those relationships at a senior leadership level within Osprey, notwithstanding the need to have very close operational ties also through the likes of the local TB committees.
Thank you. Rick, you've been waiting patiently.
Just three things. Make two observations and then hopefully a constructive suggestion. Firstly, I was on the council when we made this decision was made to hand it all back to Osprey, and we heard the strategy about they're going to have buffers and barriers and what have you. And I remember being somewhat derided by Councillor Belford at the time about me saying that there's a potential weakness to the north, and these possums might march over the Gisborne area on Hawke's Bay. And it just seemed like it was a ridiculous thing. But in actual fact, this is kind of what's happened. Most people think that possums sit up trees and sit up power poles and don't move. But boy, oh boy, possums can cover a lot of ground in a night and a lot more ground over a week. They are great travellers. So we have to be really vigilant. To come back to the suggestion, what Ian has said, I agree. We need to have a close liaison at that senior officer level and so on. But what we got from the meeting the other day from Osprey was that they stopped talking to us, and that they regret this was that they weren't managing these things very well. So I think what we should do is we should pass a resolution requiring Osprey and the officers of HBRC to present to council a report once a year on the status of possum control, possum management, etc., and all the various factors, so we can, as governors, have a look at that, and we can examine it for ourselves. And I think the very fact that we are doing that will change behaviour, because we took our eye off it, left it alone because we thought someone else was doing it. It turns out they weren't. So let's just have a little bit of accountability here. So we need an annual report, and at that point, all the issues that have been raised here can be raised with them again, and we can ask some penetrating questions, hopefully penetrating questions, and hold people to account. That's our job.
Thank you, Rick. We can consider that resolution. Neil, you had a thought or a comment?
Yes, I wonder whether Ian can help us with our obligations, any statutory obligations under legislation for that area. I appreciate it's non-PCA, but what, and I'm assuming that the regional pest management plan covers that area. So what is there around monitoring a non-PCA area, and what are our obligations?
So look, I'll defer that to Mark or Campbell in terms of our monitoring obligations outside the PCA, but my understanding is that we don't have any. So I see Campbell nodding his head, so that I think it's
so can you tell me that the regional pest management plan doesn't cover a non-PCA area? Is that what we're saying? Have we got any legislated regional obligations? 1, 2, in our regional pest management plan. Do we not have obligations to non-PCA areas? Can we answer that, Campbell? Or?
Yes, I can. So the PCA rules only apply to the areas mapped within the PCA program, and that map is within the regional pest management plan. So no, outside of that, as far as I'm aware, there are no requirements for land occupiers to manage possums.
Now, what's our regional council's obligations? We've got a regional pest management plan, which has objectives to rid ourselves of possums. I'm assuming that covers the entire region. Have we got a gap in the plan around non-PCA areas? And the other question is, do we have any legislated obligations under Biosecurity Acts to manage risks in those areas, including non-PCA areas?
That could be a good question. I hate to pass it to you, Campbell, but in regards to predator-free and possum eradication, the only other thing I would add to that is we do have a program within the plan to secure those possum eradication areas long term. But no, there is certainly a big challenge ahead of us. But Campbell, you may be better placed to answer that question.
So I think there's two parts to that in my mind, and the first is that the Biosecurity Act obviously applies across the whole region from our perspective.
Yep.
And that, as Mark's pointed out, for some programs they have localised areas, but the PCA program and its obligations do come into pass when Osprey TB3 transitions vector control areas out of their control and over to the PCA. So actually their areas are in the region, obviously, and therefore when they transition out of their management and come to us, then that activates the RPMP provisions, if you like, and the obligations on landowners. I guess the other part of it is large areas of Crown land and things like that. There's obligations under the good neighbour rules and those sorts of things in terms of Crown land, and that's a partial provision or a mechanism by which we can have control over, I guess, a program or areas not under our direct management. Does that help your question, Councillor Curtin?
No, it doesn't. I'm needing to know what our actual position is, Campbell, what the legislation says we're responsible for, and what our plan says we're responsible for. What is our baseline position on these areas?
So perhaps if I could just jump in here, Chair. So the tool that we would use for pest management is our regional pest management strategy. So that was the document that was promulgated last year, went through council processes, went through public consultation, and it sets up our obligations and our requirements under the Biosecurity Act for regional pest management, lays out various pests and their various control mechanisms. That's the tool that we use to both require others to do work and which lays out work that we have to do ourselves. So that document includes details on how we're managing possums, including the PCA work, the good neighbour rule, but it doesn't set council up to be the pest manager and the deliverer of pest management work across every part of the region, including private land and conservation estate. What it does is it sets up those agencies or those owners of that land to do that work themselves, and for us to then have a compliance mechanism or a lever to have them do work if we're not satisfied it's being done to the required standard. Campbell, not sure whether you want to add to that, but I think, Council, that's kind of the broad and big picture. It's a bit like a regional plan. We have requirements to produce a regional plan under the Resource Management Act. That regional plan sets up for us our varying issues regionally, catchment based, and will require others to do things as well as ourselves as council to do things, but it doesn't propose that we take on all of those obligations ourselves. It provides us instead with levers and tools to either coercively or otherwise get people to do work they should be doing themselves across those areas of land.
Yeah, Martin, I will come to you, but I can see, and I'm feeling the same as Neil, really. We've got another bunch of people just to take it down that are supposed to be doing something, and they didn't do it very well, and we've got a whole lot of farmers that are in deep crap because of it. You know, it isn't good enough, and we do need to get our heads around that. Martin?
Yeah, that was partly my point, Mr. Chairman, and I think if Councillor Curtin is interested in this, is a very good discussion, which I'm discovering as we speak, on the front end of the Regional Pest Management Strategy, signed by Councillor Belford, that explains all of this, and it basically says that we have responsibility for biosecurity, but we're not legally obliged as a council to manage pests under it. It's an enabling statute. So the rules and the frameworks we set in place then become mandatory, including on landowners who are within eradication areas or control areas or whatever it might be. But I'm wondering if the broader strategic issue here that is being presented is where you have two entities established for the purpose, and there's a baton pass somewhere, there's the potential for the baton to fall.
Exactly.
And off the back of the Osprey review, maybe it's time for this council to look at that structure and think, is this the most effective structure that we are enabled to empower and adopt for future purposes and avoiding this type of issue? So just learn from it, adaptive management, and respond. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ian, do you want to answer that? We need to move on from this.
I think that nicely sort of positions the Section 17A review that we've got underway. Look, there's no attempt here for staff to shirk our responsibilities or obligations. We're absolutely not wanting to give you a view that we're ducking or weaving on this. We know that the council has roles and responsibilities. We just wanted to lay out for you clearly which are ours and which are others. The review, I think, will go to those questions of baton passing or opportunity for gaps to create or be created and risk to be developed, and then give us advice on how to manage those, including if our RPMP, in spite of only being a few months old, has deficiencies, well, we may be bringing you back advice on fixing those. But that's happening now, and we're absolutely up for the challenge.
Thank you, Ian. Michelle, do you want to move the paper and then you can speak to it?
I was going to move the amendment to it.
It was quite an in-depth one, wasn't it? Just a question. Do you think that because we've had a lot of tree felling, and then you have the subsequent regrowth and also the mast season, has that contributed to it? Because it allows them to thrive, eh? And then also when you're tree felling, then the possums all head in another direction. So a lot of the forest trees have been felling over the last couple of years. So would that impact on the possum population as well? Because all that lovely clay, especially with the regrowth, would make them thrive. On top of that, the mast seeds with all the extra clay, the seeds and everything. So, which only happens every 7 years, that may have also contributed. And I also see the efficiencies with collaborating between the two. And I think it's needed. It's necessary to have that collaboration between Osprey and Regional Council, just keeping a check on what each other's doing, and then you might see where the issues are. And I support the paper.
Chair, could I move?
Yeah, Rick.
Could I move the paper, and also a second part that the Osprey and the officers of the HBRC bring to the council every year a report on possum management in the region.
Yeah, do we have a second of that resolution? Jeff, you have seconds.
And I do so because I'm just seeing that we've missed a trick here. People accept that. I don't want to point blame at anybody. I think that helps. But we've got a problem. We need to fix it. And it seems to be that there's some mismatch between where the edges of HBRC are and Osprey are. And if the two organisations have to present a report to us as to what they're doing, well, then it gives us the opportunity to make sure that they haven't missed a trick and the edges match, and we tie up our efforts here. That's the best way I think we can deal with this. And if they have to account, well, then it gives us the opportunity to examine that. And if they know they're going to have to account, well, then they'll be preparing themselves to make sure that they've done the job properly. So the council's watchful eye on this, a careful check, auditing of it, will be one of the best things we can do to help improve our performance in this area.
Okay, Jeff, you're seconding that resolution. Do you wish to speak?
Yeah. When we had the kororo with Osprey officials, it actually became very clear to me that actually there have been signs previous and the history repeated itself. And I think I totally agree with Rick. We just need to have a regular conversation that the two entities actually have to work together, and hopefully in that way we actually will be on top of it, because this is just unacceptable. From what we've seen, if you look at the history, it's unacceptable what has happened. I don't lay blame, but it's unacceptable.
Thank you. We've got a simple resolution. We don't want to have too many speakers. I mean, it's pretty, speaks for itself really, but Neil, you've got your hand up, and Michelle, you want to talk?
No, I'm not.
Well, just briefly to comment, Mr. Chair, that I'm pleased to see the Section 17A process taking place. What occurs to me is that it's a little similar to Havelock North water scenario, where it occurs to me there's a gap in our process, and Martin's highlighted the overarching policy we're working to, but then that was subject to rules that sit under it. So it occurs to me that there potentially is scope or room to introduce a process to manage outside those PCAs in the case of possum management, so that we know what's going on. If it's not us, who is it? And are they doing it well? So it's that sort of, if you like, questioning of our structures that I think is important to hear, and hopefully Ian and co, we can get those answers and plug the gap, because it's too important for the region economically to allow a gap like that. I've got some comments I'd like to make at some point on our marine biosecurity as well. I think that's another area that we need to sharpen up on. But let's take the opportunity to plug the gaps and make sure that we don't end up with a problem that we could have headed off had we had enough, if you like, notice and planning and policy around.
Thank you, Neil. Look, Craig, do you really need to speak? Because I need to move on.
I'll take it offline. I just got a suggestion to maybe formalise this, but that can wait.
Okay, but so we've got a resolution that requesting that Osprey and the Regional Council report to us annually on this so that we can understand the issue. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? It's carried. Now, I just want to, we just need to move that we receive the report. So, Michelle, you're going to move to receive, oh, she can't, can she? She's not.
I thought my resolution was that I receive a report and.
Oh, was it? Okay. Well, we'll give that a big tick then. Okay.
I was looking to be efficient for you, Chair.
Yeah, well, I need some efficiency around here at the moment. So item 14, CE's verbal report. James?
I'll keep this very brief, Mr. Chair. Look, the focus obviously for the organisation continues to be in supporting the civil defence welfare response. As I indicated last week, we're down to one shift, but it does remain a resource burden, if you like, on the three principal councils of Hastings, Napier and the Regional Council. We're managing okay, but we're going to be in this for the longer haul. Central Government's indicated they would like the Regional Civil Defence Welfare Response to be maintained at least through the level 3 and level 2 periods. So that's going to take us certainly through to the end of this financial year and possibly into the next. So we're going to remain in this business for some time. The focus of the rest of the organisation has been on the transition to level 3. There's great information, I think, in your significant activities report about the work that's been done at great pace to support that to occur. We do have our field staff all now back in the field, and they are able to access our buildings for equipment and data logging, those sorts of requirements. So we have both the Dalton Street and Guppy Road facilities currently open for staff, not open for the public. We have a contact tracing app that's been allocated to all staff, so we can do contact tracing in the event of a COVID-19 positive in our workforce. And also we've been able to access all the necessary PPE that we require and have provided that to staff, as well as a range of other protocols that have been signed off and provided to staff as well. So the organisation is running well under the level 3, and the planning is now underway for the transition to level 2. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, James. Questions for James? No questions, James. That's pretty good. Okay.
Can I just suggest that we could do the significant activities report by exception as well? So
yeah,
just happy to take any questions in relation to that, and if you're if there aren't none, then we can just have the report proceed.
Yeah, it's not on my agenda. That so I didn't skip it. I've made a note.
It was a late paper. Sorry, Chair.
Okay. So significant activities. Do we have any comment on that? No comment.
I'm happy to move the paper be received, Chair.
Thank you very much. We have Seconder Martin. All those in favour? Aye, thank you very much. Now, we do have a little bit of time for councillors to give a brief update on where they're at the moment, if they feel the need to do so. So, Rick, I'd like to start off with you this time because of your particular role in civil defence.
Well, thank you, Chair. The civil defence function is working really well, actually. A couple of things, the number of welfare cases which the civil defence are responding to is slowly declining from the peak. There's less food parcels going out. Civil defence welfare still continues to assist people with things other than food, although that's a very small part of it. The number of cases is going down, but their complexity is increasing. There's now going to be, I think, a significant a challenge for us in handing over what has been so far to date a civil defence response back to MSD, where it will belong in the longer term, because we are moving out of this pandemic, and hopefully sooner rather than later. The DHB has been handled it very well. I think all the health systems across New Zealand have coped very well. I think when this started, we all looked with horror and shock at what was happening in Italy and Spain and other places, and thought that this would, if it happened here, would be terrible. It hasn't. We've dodged about 30 bullets there. But still, where people have been working in this area, they've been very well supported by the health, and I think the health in New Zealand has done really well. The police have done, I think, a really good job. They had the military on standby, just in case. As I understand it, the military standby is now over. They have gone back to the base if they ever came out, and the police have just managed it, I thought, with a pretty firm but gentle hand. Not go too over the top. On the other end of it, Kiwis have been very compliant. I was very surprised at the level of compliance by New Zealanders here. The rate of compliance has been phenomenal, comparable to anywhere else on the planet, really. And when the Prime Minister talks about the 5 million people on Team New Zealand, she's been exactly right. Everybody's on the team and everybody's done their bit. I think people are really relieved to be getting out of level 4 to level 3. There's some truths being revealed. I was on my bike to my usual 8 o'clock meeting with civil defence this morning. I see that the recycling has been put out in Hastings here, and outside one house, I won't name it, there was 5 washing baskets of wine bottles. I thought I had a remarkable effort.
And it wasn't my
anyway,
house.
so we're all really, it wasn't the chair's house, but a remarkable effort. So we've all coped our own way, and we've all got through this, and I think we're going to be better and stronger for it. Can I say to James that I think we've learned a number of lessons for the council out of this, and I'd like the officers of the council to go through it with the staff and to identify what are the things that we have learned which we are better for out of C19, to identify them and then make sure we secure them. I don't want us to go back to where we were just because that's how we drift backwards. There's a number of things we've done really well. And I think also about how the decision-making has been made in council. I think we've been improvements. So I think we should grab those as well and hang on to them. There's been a lot of good things learned out of this, so let's go on. The last thing I'd say is that the regional council, with a difficult decision, took responsibility for funding civil defence in the region, and I think we can say now quite safely that it was a very good decision. It's worked very well. We've had a really good test of our systems. They've stood up to the pressure. Mind you, it wasn't a major, sudden jolt. But having done that, where our systems have been proven, we've built linkages with iwi, we've built linkages with the community organisations, built all sorts of linkages here, and these will stand this region in good shape for the future. So all in all, a pretty good response. We're just going to now on the downward slide to we're out the door and get our lives back to as best as we can as normal in the near future. So,
thank you, Rick. Is there anyone else wishes to report on their activities in the last week related to COVID? Jeff, how's your food distribution initiative going?
Yeah, excellent. We've got some normality to it now, where we actually got a hub at the showgrounds where we actually can drop off a large truckload of produce, and it works really well. It gets then distributed to all the hubs from Waiwara down to Dennyberg. A little bit of an issue is actually return of containers that produce goes in. Still looking after the Ahuriri hub as well. So, but we're actually now doing it more centralised and in a timely fashion. So instead of it taking sort of 12 hours a week, it's now down to 4 to 6 hours. And the growers, no questions asked, they'll continue to support as long as we have produce and as long as there is a need. So that actually is really good. Another little bit of an issue that you maybe all have heard about is, although we're now out of level 3, I would love to actually get onto my favourite thing, which is my electric mountain bike, and I can't because the tracks are closed. And we really need to look into this because it just doesn't make sense. And I just have to put that in. Sorry.
Well done, Jeff. I never expected that you would put that in. Does anyone else have any comments? Yes, Martin.
Look, I just want to take a second to really thank and acknowledge the superhuman effort right across the organisation, from you, James, down to the bottom, in coping with all of this, and transitioning from level 0 to level 4 and now back again. And in the midst of all of that, having to go to the ends of the earth and back to scramble around with all sorts of signals from us in the central government, request for projects. It really has been an extreme amount of pressure that you've all had to cope with, and I just want to thank you for doing that on behalf of all of us. That's all I wanted to share. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Martin. Api? Now we've got 10 minutes, guys, and I'm going to close it off at 1. Api?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've got no questions. I would reinforce the comments of Councillor Williams in regards to commending our staff. The last thing I would like to say, in lines with what Councillor Barker mentioned earlier on around New Zealanders' efforts in our COVID situation, and make reference to Anzac Day, which has recently passed. For me, it was great to see New Zealand address that opportunity in a refreshing and innovative way. But also, it highlighted the last 4 weeks and the level of patriotism that New Zealanders are showing on an individual basis through this COVID situation. And the Anzac Day ceremony was an opportunity to reinforce some of those fantastic patriotic actions that our New Zealanders have been showing, and particularly here and around our neighbourhoods and here in Hawke's Bay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that was pretty sensational, Anzac Day, all right. Okay, if there's no other further comments, James?
Thank you, Chair. Look, just quickly in response to Councillor Williams, I just want to thank my team as well and acknowledge the efforts by people right across the organisation. So some of our most junior staff, for example, worked through last weekend to prepare ourselves for the level 3 transition. So while there's been a big effort by managers and group managers, it has been staff right across. And the thing which has been striking throughout has been the willingness for people to do long hours, do weekends without the slightest hesitation. So I'm really, really proud of our team, and I will pass on the message from this meeting. Just in relation to the cycleways, for the public's benefit, I do want to be clear. We have 74% of the cycleways are open. We have gone to our links to ensure that we have everything open that we can. We just have some sections of the cycleway where stock have nowhere they can be moved to because they're in a permanent lease arrangement. and gates are required. And look, last week I think it was on the weekend, we clocked at one of our sites 507 cyclists in the day go through there. So cycling is very popular right now, and the reality is that if there is a gate, people will touch those. And the advice we've had is that the COVID virus can persist for up to 72 hours on those surfaces. So, we haven't taken the decision lightly. We understand people are desperately keen to get out there and do what cycling they can. But it has been work that we've been doing with the other councils nationally and also with the District Health Board that has arrived at the decision that we've taken. We are hopeful that once we get to level 2 that we can lift those restrictions. And look, we have opened the car parks to various regional parks, Waitangi, Pakawhai, in the last 24 hours as well. So look, we're doing what we can to maximise the opportunity for the public, but while balancing that public health risk as well.
Thank you. Will?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just a quick update on the drought, which is not really anything new other than it is getting quite a lot worse. I suspect, or I feel like it's spreading north now, and perhaps those of you that are up further north will have a better idea on that. But basically, I understand farmers are starting to dip into capital stock now, so breeding ewes and cows and the like are starting to be sold or sent to the works. So I guess just to point out the long-term effects of this are getting longer by the day, and I know we talk about recovery and due to the COVID effects, but there's some long-lasting effects here from this drought that will be enduring for a few years yet.
Yeah, thank you, Will. As I look out my window of my office, I see these incredibly enduring blue skies. It feels like I'm in Queensland. And we all thinking about your region. It's just devastating what's happening, and there doesn't seem to be any respite. And the effects on our GDP are going to be substantial because the Central Hawke's Bay region has been a huge contributor to the GDP of our region, and this year they're just going to have to tighten their belts. And they will tighten their belts. So, yeah, our thoughts are with you, and it just doesn't seem to be any respite. Unless any councillor's got anything really urgent they want to put on the agenda, I will move on because we're running a little bit late as it is. And so thanks all for those reports. And yeah, James, I think it's pretty conclusive amongst the team here that you and your staff have done a fantastic job and contributed to all this. So yeah, thanks for that. So there are no minor items for discussion. So we can conclude our meeting unless I have missed something, James, because I'm half agenda here. I don't think I have. And so we'll close the meeting. And who was closing the meeting? Jerif was he? If I recall.
Yeah, I'll do that. Just bear with me a second. I'm just going to change my background. Done. And I'll... okay. I don't know whether you can see this, but this is a quote that I live by, and which is very important. Just have a read and do a bit of a meditation on it. We have to be brave and we have to be generous. Not generous in what we give, but also in the time that we give as well, and our intellect. We've got some really capable people in our council and our staff on the council room, around the council table. So I think it's actually very important. So I'll close with a karakia.
And just to confirm, you're not grumbling about the cycle tracks.
No. But I will be checking out this afternoon whether my side of the track is open. Okay. What I'll do is the kia tau te tau katoa te whai o te tau tau ariki ihu karaiati me te aroha o te atua me te witiangia te hangatea ki te wairua tapu ake amane. And with that,
Thank
I'll
you,
leave you.
Didn't he do well? Thank you, everybody. We will reconfirm it's the close of our meetings. Thanks for everybody who is watching. And I'm sure there was some issues that people were interested in. And we will close our meeting now and reconvene at 1 o'clock
That's out now, isn't it?
Sorry, what, 1:30.